So at the grand old age of 19, I booked a 4-week return flight to Florida. And I went to a small municipal airfield on the east coast of Florida and got a PPL after 3.5 weeks. So I had half a week left. So there was an English guy there who was hours building, and he said, well, I'll fly you to Kissimmee Airport, drop you off, you go to Disney World, and I'll come pick you up in 3 days. So I did. I had a great time. And on the flight back, he was flying, obviously, and I was looking at the map, and we'd heard on the radio that there was some parachuting, and the weather wasn't brilliant. And he said to me, can you reroute me around this airfield because there's parachuting there? And I said, okay. And I was looking at the map, and the next thing, the map's on the roof, my stomach's in my mouth, and I looked up, and out of the clouds, and I can still see this, that we're 30 odd years later, a twin came out the clouds and missed us by 10 foot. And even now, I can see the guy's face. He had a beard. I could see he had Ray-Ban glasses on and a David Clark headset. He never saw us. And I looked at the guy who was flying, and he looked at me, and we just burst into laughter. Just that shock moment of, my word. And the way he bumped us down, had he not done that, we would have collided 100%.
Brian, welcome to Inspirability. It's a real pleasure to have you on the show today. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. There's a lot to talk about today, and I'm really excited to hear your story. So you are an aviation ambassador for the Department for Transport. You are also the Chief Operating Officer of Aerobility. You are the Deputy General Manager at NATS. You're a STEM ambassador and also a disability advocate. So there's lots of exciting stuff for us to talk about and for you to share with us today.
Yeah.
But first of all, I'd like to put it into context. I'd like you to tell me a bit about who is Brian.
Wow. So where do we start? So I was born in Plymouth in 1971, giving away my age. And my father was in the Navy, which is why we were in Plymouth. And then we moved quite a bit to Portsmouth. To Fareham, and I grew up actually in Fareham, which is a market town midway between Portsmouth and Southampton. I've got a brother who's 18 months younger than me and a sister who is 4.5 years younger than me. My father was away a lot when we grew up, and I went to primary school in Fareham. And it's funny because I was looking through my old school reports because I'm going back to the school that I went through secondary education with. I'm going back there next week for the first time since I left it 32 years ago to give a motivational talk or 3. And even at the age of 7, 8, 9 in the early 80s, you were graded at primary school. And I always finished second in the year, and it really frustrated me. I always wanted to come top, but I could never beat the person who always, the same guy who always used to finish top. Anyway, brought up there, and after the first year of secondary school, both my brother and I were sent to a naval boarding school. So it came about because my father was offered the opportunity, and pretty much the Navy paid 90% of the fees. So we were sent off to a boarding school, which is where we stayed until A-levels. I wanted, from the age of about 15, I wanted to fly, and I wanted to fly. The only thing that was available at the time was British Airways sponsored pilot cadet scheme. So I set my sights on that. That's what I wanted to do. And you needed maths and physics at A-level. So I'd just done my GCSEs. I did quite well in them, but I was never brilliantly academic. There's no A's, there's no A stars, there's nothing on any of my certificates. And I knew I had to do maths and physics, and bizarrely, those were the 2 subjects I struggled most in. If I could have done anything, I would have done languages, because I was quite good at French. I did English as well at A-level, but I had to do maths and physics. So that was a bind, because I just couldn't get it. I couldn't get those 2 subjects. And I looked at my reports recently, and they said he's going to have to work really hard just to just to pass these exams. I thought, oh my word.
Did that not put you off at any point?
No, I kind of just thought, well, you have to do this to do what you want to do. So suck it up. And probably did I work hard enough? I thought I worked as hard as I could, and it came to results day. And my father was actually posted to a place called Shape in Belgium, which is a big NATO base. And I was there in the summer holidays. I got my exam results, and I got an E in physics, which was a pass, and an N in maths, which was not good enough.
It must have been quite soul destroying that you put all that work in at that point. How did you feel when you got those results?
So gutted that I'd done all that work and it hadn't paid off, but I didn't dwell on it because in my head, that's what I wanted to do. In order to do that, you've got to get this. So I'm quite binary, like, problem, solution. So the problem is you haven't passed, so learn it again. So I sat down for 3 months and I did practice paper after practice paper. I mean, the internet wasn't a thing back then. So I used whatever resource I could find to teach myself and resat the paper 3 months later and got another N. So someone was trying to tell me something, but I was stubborn and I ignored that and thought, right, I'll give it another crack. In the meantime, I'd started to learn to fly in Belgium. There was a flying club, a huge Air Force base, US Air Force base called Chevres, which has got an almost 2-mile runway. Learning to fly in a little Piper Tomahawk, so landing wasn't an issue. You could float for a mile and still be fine. After it took about 7 hours to get 7 hours, took about 6 months, and I thought this is going to take forever. So at the grand old age of 19, I booked a 4-week return flight to Florida, and I went to a small municipal airfield called Naples Air Center on the east coast of Florida, and got a PPL after 3.5 weeks. So I had half a week left, and I thought, I'm going to go to Disney World. So there was an English guy there who was hours building, and he said, well, I'll fly you to Kissimmee Airport, drop you off, you go to Disney World, and I'll come pick you up in 3 days. So I did. I had a great time going around Disney World. And on the flight back, he was flying, obviously, and I was looking at the map, and we'd heard on the radio that there was some parachuting, and the weather wasn't brilliant. And he said to me, can you reroute me around this airfield because there's parachuting there? And I said, okay. And I was looking at the map, and the next thing, the map's on the roof, my stomach's in my mouth, and I looked up, and out of the clouds, and I can still see this, that we're 30 odd years later, a twin came out the clouds and missed us by 10 foot. And even now, I can see the guy's face. He had a beard. I could see he had Ray-Ban glasses on and a David Clark headset. He never saw us. And I looked at the guy who was flying, and he looked at me, and our reaction was exactly the same. We just burst into laughter. Just that shock moment of, my word. And the way he bumped us down, had he not done that, we would have collided 100%. So we flew back to the airfield quite quietly and landed. And my flying instructor was a Californian lady in her mid-20s. She was a bit of a gung-ho kind of person, drove a 5-litre Mustang. She had no fear. And she said, what you must do now, what you must do is get back up in the air. It's like falling off a bike. And I said, what I must do now is find the nearest bar and go and have a beer, which is what I did with a guy who had been flying, because the last thing I wanted to do was go back up in the air. It had nearly killed me. So I said, no, I'm done. So anyway, went back to Belgium, retook maths, A-level, and got a C. So I now had a private pilot's license. I'd converted it into a Belgian PPL, which was an interesting process. I had to go and do a medical, and it's almost like a fighter pilot's medical, really thorough with some really weird tests. And one of the tests, they put you in a like the mastermind chair, and they press the button and it starts spinning round, and you're blindfolded, and then they pour water in your ear, And then they start spinning in more quickly. And I thought, what the hell are we doing here? Why am I in a chair, blindfolded, having water in my ear, at least I hope it's water, spinning round and around and around? And then, do I say this? This is quite embarrassing because then they tried to do the cough test, and any man will know what the cough test is. But so the guy says, what I need you to do, and these are his exact words, and this was lost in translation, I need you to blow on your wrist. So he had his hand cupping my nether regions, and I'm going like this, blowing on my wrist, which wasn't what he wanted me to do. He wanted me to force that thing. So anyway, I got that medical, and a Belgian PPL allows you only to fly in Belgian sovereign airspace, and there's not a lot of that. So I flew a little bit in Belgium. Quick anecdote. So I was going to fly my father. My father does not like flying in light aircraft. He's flown, when he was in the Navy, he was in 2 helicopter crashes and survived both. So he's a little bit nervous in light aircraft. And as he said, it is one thing having your 19-year-old son drive you because you have an element of control, because you know how to drive a car and you know how to stop it. It's completely different when they take you flying. And I had agreed to do a ferry flight back from Charleroi airport, and he was sat in the clubhouse having a beer because he was trying to calm his nerves, and I flew with somebody over to Charleroi. I jumped out and picked up the Tomahawk and flew it back, and this is a great lesson, I took nothing except for a headset, no map, nothing. And I thought, well, I'll just fly the reciprocal, it's early evening, there's no wind, easy. So I'm flying back. I knew how long it had taken to get there, and I looked at my watch and thought, I should be able to see the airfield, and I can't. This is embarrassing. I literally do not know where I am. And Belgium's really flat. There aren't many features. So I radioed the clubhouse and I said, I'm temporarily unsure of where I am. And my dad's obviously hearing all this and cracking another beer, thinking, oh my word, I really don't want to go in an airplane now. And I couldn't find the airfield. And fortunately, somebody stood outside and said, oh, there's a hot air balloon. Can you see the hot air balloon? And after a few minutes, I could see it. And he said, right, head towards it and then turn left, and then you'll see us. And I said, okay, fine. So I found the airfield, landed, took my father flying for the first time, and only time up until something which no doubt we'll talk about later on. So I now had a PPL, I had maths, physics at A-level, so I applied to British Airways. Hello, this is me. And I thought, great, I am now going to achieve what I've set out to do over the last few years. Went to British Airways, did their tests, and they said, sorry, you haven't got the aptitude to fly. There was no right of appeal, that was it. You were allowed to do the test once, game over.
That must have been really hard to hear after all that you'd been through up to that point. So how did you respond to that?
I kind of thought, well, what do I do now? That was the obvious reaction. I can't do what I wanted to do. What am I going to do? And I was adamant that I wouldn't join the forces because I'd been at a military boarding school and my dad was in the military, and I thought, I don't really want to join the forces. So I applied to the Royal Navy, and they said, you haven't got the aptitude to fly. We'll offer you a position, but we need you to go to university first. And I said, not for me. University is not for me. I don't want to. I actually asked them a question in interview. I said, to what benefit? I said, because the only way I see that is I get a bit of paper at the end and a load of debt. And they said, well, that's what we think you should do. And I said, well, I don't think I should. So I left them alone and I went to the Army Air Corps. And I said, I'd like to fly your helicopters, please. And they said, yeah, we'll let you do that, but you've got to be an infantryman for 5 years. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. So then I went to the Air Force. And my dad will laugh at this story because obviously there's a seniority thing in terms of the forces. The Navy is a senior service, then you've got the Army, then you've got the Air Force. And obviously there's great rivalry between the Air Force and the Navy. So I went to apply to the Air Force and said, this is me, I'd like to become a pilot. And they used the tests that I'd done with British Airways, because you're only allowed to do that test once in a certain period of time, although it was out with that period of time. And they said, you haven't got the aptitude to fly. And they gave me an option of becoming a navigator or becoming an air traffic controller. I phoned my dad. I was at Biggin Hill at the Officer Selection Centre there, and I said, they give me a choice of two things here. What do you think? And his advice to me was, don't be a navigator. And his rationale was because what are your transferable skills? You're sitting in the back of a jet, reading a map, dropping missiles. He said, what are you going to do with that when the time comes to leave the Air Force? Which, when I look back and reflect on that, was quite a naive advice, because obviously you're still in the Air Force and you're operating as an officer in the Air Force, and that grows you as a person. There's all sorts of opportunities. However, I think it was his way of saying, go and be an air traffic controller. So I did, and I started that in 1992 at the grand old age of 21. I was at RAF Benson for 4 years, and then I turned down the opportunity to go to RAF Bruggen in Germany. I was given a choice of RAF Bruggen or Shawbury as an instructor. And I chose, much to the chagrin of a lot of my peers, I chose to stay in the UK and go to Shawbury, because I thought that would be a better job in terms of job satisfaction, teaching people how to do air traffic control. So I did that. And in about 1999 it was, I started to think, I think I can do this job outside of the Air Force. And I signed up to do a permanent commission, which at the time was you do 16 years. And I was only 7 years in. And I started to get itchy feet. And I was open with the Air Force and said, this is what I want to do. I'm going to apply to NATS. And presumably you'll let me go if I get offered a job. Yes, they said, no problem at all. Right up until the point I was offered the job, when they said, you've got to stay here for another 18 months, which was frustrating to say the least. But fortunately, NATS kept a role open for me, or position on the training course. So I got no dispensation. The fact that I'd done just shy of 8 years, that's fine. I had to do the whole course with everybody else. So in March 2000, I joined NATS. I did an 18-month training. And part of that was 15 hours of flying again. So I got to go solo for the second time in my life, because I didn't maintain my PPL. And then in March 2003, I gained my first validation, civil validation. I did that for 5 years, and then I became a supervisor, and then I became a watch manager. And in 2016, I became Deputy General Manager for the Terminal Control Operation, which is basically everything below 24,000 feet. And I did that through the very busy summers of 2016, 2017, and then in May 2018, everything changed.
So we'll go into all that in a moment.
Yeah.
Just sort of unpicking a little bit about your childhood and sort of everything up to that point. So the fact that you had a few goes at maths and physics A level, and then the BA selection. Obviously, at some point through that, you had this dream where you wanted to be an airline pilot, and then you realised the dream wasn't going to work. How did that make you feel, and how did you then move on from that? I'm just trying to think of, what our listeners can benefit from hearing your story, who are maybe experiencing similar situations of their own, where something they really want to do and it's just not working.
I think I'm quite lucky, and I do put it down to a military upbringing, a military school, and being in the military. So obviously I hadn't been in the military at that point, at the point at which I failed to get the job that I wanted to do. But I'd been in and around a military upbringing all of my life. And I knew from an early age that I can't change that decision. I tried. I looked at whether I could appeal, what was wrong, how could I do it better, but that wasn't an option. There wasn't an opportunity to have another go. So why waste any energy worrying about what's just happened? And that's, I kind of have that mantra, and have had that mantra ever since then. And even I guess if I go back to primary school, when you're being assessed, if you like, 35 people in the year and you're finishing second, that instilled a competitive edge, I guess, of, well, I don't want to finish second. I always want to finish first. I joke with my nephews now that second place is first loser. Why would you want second? Why would you have a silver medal when actually you've gone for a gold medal? Just taking par. And I think, personal view, probably not a well accepted view, I cannot stand the fact that schools give participation medals. I mean, you don't want to get something just for turning up. You've got to earn it, and that's how I've always been. Earn those things. Anyway, I didn't dwell on it. I thought, okay, well, you can't do that now. So what can you do? What do you want to do? What's the next best thing? And ultimately, I ended up in a job which is far better than being an airline pilot, because I get to direct airline pilots and tell them where to go and what to do, which is gives far more satisfaction than sitting in an airplane pushing buttons. A very, very simplistic view on an airline pilot's job, I know. I had to get that in.
But what's really interesting about your story is that you thought you knew what you wanted to do, and you thought you knew where you wanted your life to go. But actually, looking back, are you saying you choose, if you could talk to yourself then, would you say actually you don't want to do this? Would
No.
you choose?
I'd still go for it, but how could I influence the decision? That's the really difficult thing, which is why I don't dwell on it too much, because you had to get two specific A levels to meet the criteria to be invited to go and do the test. How you perform on the test, how do you prepare for that? Now, as it turns out, incorrectly, I believed that having a pilot's license would display the correct attributes in terms of skill to fly an aeroplane. But the test said no, computer said no, you don't have that aptitude to do it. I'm a firm believer that, and I guess that comes down probably to the competitive element of that selection, because anybody, as I've proved, can fly an aeroplane. Now, some people can do it in 40 hours from no experience. They can get a private pilot's license in 40 hours, and the minimum is 45. So some people could do it in 45 hours. Some people, it might take 145 hours. But everybody could get there, I think. And that would be the same of getting a commercial pilot's license. But if you're a company, an airline, you want the people who are more likely to succeed. What you don't want to do is invest a whole load of money just to then say, oh, I'm sorry, but it's going to take too long. It's going to cost us far too much money to invest in you. So we want to do that in the shortest time possible. And clearly my score said, no, he's not in this bracket. He's probably going to take too long. So he's not worth taking the risk on. And you can't influence that. So you just have to accept that that's the decision. And that happens loads in life, doesn't it? You do stuff, you fail at it. I think the key is you have to fail intelligently. Why have I failed? If it's something within your control, then you can look at it, change what you did, change your approach. But if it's out with your control, you can't worry about it because you can't influence it. If you can't influence it, there's no point worrying about it.
Wise words, absolutely. Because our strapline here in Inspirability is you have control. And, the key message, I think, from what you're saying is that control what you can control. But there are some things that you can't control. That you couldn't control what that test was going to be or who your competitors were. There are only a certain number of places for that scheme. And there are however many people. You can't control on the day who's turning up. What you can control is how you respond to that news. And so what advice would you give to someone who's, it's not working out where they want to go, where they think they want to go, just in your situation, it's not working out. How would you say is best for them to retake control of that situation and then regroup and approach it in a different way?
I think so. Two things, two words: honest and accountable. So you have to be honest with yourself. Is this for me? Am I approaching this in the right way? So am I going to be able to achieve what I've set out to achieve? And there could be all sorts of barriers to stop you. Barriers shouldn't stop you. There are barriers that you can hurdle over, but there will be barriers on occasion where you just, whatever that might be, you haven't got the aptitude. Well, if you haven't got the aptitude, you're not going to suddenly magic the aptitude. It's like confidence. When I teach people how to be a controller, there's one thing you can't teach anybody, and that's confidence. That comes from within. You can knock somebody's confidence in an instant, and it takes a long time to build that up, depending on the resilience of the person. And accountability is, all too often people say, oh, it's not fair. Life's not fair. Well, life isn't fair. And you've got the sooner you realise that, the easier it is for you to make peace with that as a statement. Life isn't fair and bad things happen to good people. And good things happen to bad people, by the way, as well. So, you just have to plow your own furrow and think, what am I trying to achieve? Have I given it everything that I can give? Is there anything else that I can do? Can I look at it in a slightly different way? If you have given 100% and you cannot do any more, then you can't do any more, can you? You can't magic up stuff that you're not capable of doing. So resilience is key to that as well. Sometimes you just have to think, okay, well, it's not working out for whatever reason. I'll look at something else. And I don't have any regrets on that. I have one regret in life, which we'll talk about later when we come to talk about what happened to me. But in terms of career decisions, no regrets at all. So I had a lot of disappointment, a lot of failure, but I wouldn't change the opportunities that those careers have given me. I had a great 8 years in the Air Force. I've had a great career in NATS, and I wouldn't change it. Do I ever think, I wonder what it would be like if you would have passed those BA tests? Genuinely, no. I don't think about that, because who knows? I may have failed flying training.
Do you think that you've grown more in a way from failures and that you've learnt more?
Yes, you have. I think, I talk in schools and I am surprised, actually. I talk between years 6 and year 11, and I always ask, is there anybody in the audience who's never failed? And you would expect certainly younger kids, one or two of them, to put their hands up. They never do, because they realise that you fail. You don't get to age 6 without failing. I wouldn't have thought. You fail at something. You can't achieve everything, and how you deal with the failure is important. Although I did hear a really interesting story. So I speak at universities as well, and one of the lecturers said to me that they had a cohort, and there were 3 people in that cohort who had never failed in terms of exams, never failed an exam in their whole lives. So they didn't know how to cope with that failure. And they failed at university an exam, and their whole world crumbled because they'd never failed and they didn't know how to cope with that. And then they just fell apart. And you think, well, maybe that's an issue, isn't it, right? So if you're a brilliant student and you've gone A stars all through your GCSEs and all through your A levels, and then you get to something which challenges you, you can't pass, what mechanisms have you got? Unless you've done stuff outside of just studying, how are you going to cope with that failure? And key to coping with that failure is understanding why you failed, intelligently learning from the failure. Because if you don't analyze it, if you don't hold yourself to account, if you're not honest with yourself, you won't learn anything from the failure, and you'll probably fail again and then think, well, life's not fair. Or you've not done anything actually to help yourself with understanding why you failed.
Yeah, you just need to see it as part of this process of success. These are stepping stones, and the success may well be a completely different route to the one that you thought you wanted to go down. Mm-hmm. Something I'd like to touch on, though, that you said earlier that I thought was really interesting. You said you can't teach confidence, but equally we need to be able to build confidence within ourselves. So what advice would you give to someone wanting to build their own confidence?
That's a good question. So you gain confidence by becoming familiar with whatever it is that you're trying to do, right? And so if you're learning to ride a bike, if you give up the first time you fall off, you're never going to ride a bike. So your confidence level when you first get on that bike is low, because you think, well, this feels a bit weird. And normally you're about this tall and you've got stabilizers on the back to help you. If you were to take those stabilizers off and say to a 3-year-old child, go and ride that bike, they'd spend more time kissing the gravel than they would riding the bike. But so if you take that analogy and say, well, if you try to do something and the first time it becomes a little bit difficult, you quit, you're never going to build any self-confidence and or any resilience, because every time it gets tough, you think, oh, this isn't for me, I'm going to quit it. There is a, and I can't remember whose study this is, but there is a well-known study that anybody could become brilliant at anything, but it takes 10,000 hours. Now, 10,000 hours, if you put that, and I'm probably going to fail my maths here, so I'm going to do it really easily. If you did something for 10 hours a day, every day of the year, That's going to give you 3,650 hours. You've got to multiply that by 3. So for 3 years, you have to do something for 10 hours a day to become brilliant at it. Well, no one's got 10 hours in their day to do the same thing. So let's just say you do that for 5 hours a day. That's going to take you 6 years. Well, you can't even do it in 5 hours a day. So if you've got 2.5 hours a day, it's going to take you 12 years to become, and you could become from an absolutely never having touched a piano to a concert pianist, but you need 10,000 hours. So in order to be the best that you want to be, you have to invest in yourself, and you have to invest that time. And all too often people say, well, I haven't got time for that. I've got a really busy life. There's always time. If you want to do something badly enough, you will find the time.